Welcome back. In this video I wanted to see how much of a performance boost I could get with an additional $100 put into building this machine. This upgrade ended up being a lot harder to find the right configuration for the price versus the original build, and I had to get a little creative. First thing I looked for was a DDR3 kit due to the specification of the motherboard. I had to opt for lower powered RAM. I found this kit for just over $10. Then I started thinking about the GPU. I was looking for something with a couple specifications. It needed more VRAM, it needed to be cheap, and it needed to fit in the case. And in my search, I came across AMD's WX line of graphics cards. They are Polaris era, so I was still going to be limited to the similar architecture to the RX 550 that's already in the system. But I found this WX 5100 that had a total of 8 gigs of VRAM that I found for just under $60. I thought that was a pretty good deal. Lastly, with the remainder of my budget, I had to find a decent CPU upgrade that didn't suck up a ton of power and had to be under $30. I started looking for a i7 6700T variant due to its lower TDP, but they were just out of reach of my remaining budget. From there, I set my sights a little bit lower and found this i5 6400 for about $25 and pulled the trigger on that model because it was both cheaper and more efficient than the slightly more powerful i5 6500. After receiving all my packages, excited to get the system upgraded, I realized that I made a critical error that I didn't account for. The GPU I chose required a 6-pin external power adapter, and I would need to figure out a solution. $6 and a couple days later, I got a SATA 6-pin PCIe adapter delivered to my doorstep. Due to the size of the graphics card and the location of the power connector, I felt lucky and nervous because I knew the card was going to be a tight fit, but installed just fine with no issues. I got the processor and RAM swapped out with no issues as well. And after all that, I got all the cables cleaned up and powered the system on to see if everything worked, and after going through a BIOS screen acknowledging the change of RAM, the system booted right back into Windows no problem. After some driver updates for the GPU, I was up and ready to go to start testing some games with the new hardware. Getting into the benchmarks, I ran 3D Mark Steel Nomad Lite again and got a new score of 4,662. That's just over 4 times the score of the previous test on the old specs at 1126. With all my game tests, I made sure not to use any frame gen or resolution scaling to get the pure performance out of this machine. Marvel Rivals at 1080p low settings sat about 30 FPS but stayed pretty playable. Either dropping resolution or using frame gen would make this a very playable experience. Grand Theft Auto 5 Legacy at 1080p high settings ran fairly solid at around 60 FPS, but had some rendering issues, I think due to it running off of a 500 gig non-solid state hard drive. Red Dead Redemption 2 at 1080p low settings ultra textures gave me hope with the VRAM overhead. Once running, they gave me a few drops down to a rough 25 to 45 FPS range. With some changes to the settings, I think you could get a pretty solid 30 FPS. Fortnite at 1080p default settings, no scaling. On DirectX 12, it runs at 30 FPS, but I had a lot of texture issues that I attribute to the slow hard drive that the game was running on. Switching to performance mode cleaned up the performance quite a bit and fixed the texture bug. Swapping to 1600 by 900 resolution and enabling VSync made the game noticeably more snappy and responsive. This was a very pleasant Fortnite experience. With the finished specs of a WX 5100 8GB, 16 gigs of DDR3L, and an i5 6400, I would consider this a way more playable experience over the previous configuration, with still some room for improvement. I think going for the i7 6700T would be a way better option and would give you a lot better performance and noticeable responsiveness on the PC as a whole. Also, upgrading the SSD would be a higher priority than what I did in this video. Also, considering I upgraded from the RX 550, nothing is stopping me from adding the RX 550 back into the system on the second PCIe slot and messing around with lossless frame gens, multi-GPU scaling, and getting way better performance out of this. Join me in a future video where I'll be messing around with that. And with that, thank you for watching.